two undisputed champions have been taking over the heavier weight classes of both boxing and the UFC. Alex Pereira and Oleksandr Usyk have recently been calling each other out to fight in a boxing match under Queensberry rules, which if this actually happened, Usyk versus Poatan would not even be remotely fair. Now, obviously, the glaring difference when you look at a boxing match between Alex and Usyk is the fact that Alex isn't a pure boxer. He's a kickboxer who had a lot of success in Glory, now a lot of success in the UFC, two-division champion in both at both middleweight and light heavyweight. But we're talking about a completely different beast in Oleksandr Usyk, who was an undisputed champ at cruiserweight and heavyweight in boxing against guys way bigger than him. And Pereira's never even fought a heavyweight in his own sport, let alone coming to boxing, fighting the heavyweight undisputed world champion. This just would not go well whatsoever for him.
This fight is kind of ridiculous in its own right, just being that Usyk is one of the greatest heavyweight boxers of all time, let alone one of the greatest boxers of all time, against Alex Pereira, who is extremely great in MMA, his own sport. But coming to boxing, we typically know how these matchups kind of go. Alex Pereira is an extremely good kickboxer, as you mentioned, but pure boxing, as we all know, is just a completely different ball game here. Alex Pereira is a big guy, very powerful fighter, but we're talking about heavyweight, in which Usyk completely owns right now, and he's been up against the hardest of hitters in a weight class even higher than Pereira fights at. And power is good and all, but when you get to heavyweight anyways, all these guys hit hard no matter what. And one of Usyk's biggest successes anyways is just not getting hit by these guys, and his mastery of footwork and all the combination of it leading to him not getting hurt or actually fully dropped in any of his heavyweight matchups. So there's no reason to believe really that Alex Pereira would have any success. But who knows, both of these guys have entertained it, at least from their side of things, and seem to want it, which is a little even surprising from Usyk's perspective, as who really would have thought that Usyk of all people would entertain a potentially gimmicky looking of a fight that purist boxing fans would call it. So kind of surprising from his side, but definitely would be a very big money fight regardless.
Yeah, it's interesting how Usyk said he wanted this, because we know he will fight anyone, anytime, any place, the biggest, the baddest, the best, and he's kind of already done that, running through the heavyweight division, almost lapping them at this point. He says he wants to go for Daniel Dubois in the rematch next, or whoever wins that fight between Daniel Dubois and Joseph Parker. So he's already beat AJ twice, already beat Fury twice, potentially going to fight Dubois and beat him twice. If he does all of that, I mean, what is there left to do at heavyweight? Do you fight the up-and-comers? Do you fight the guys that are not on the championship level, like a Zhilei Zhang? There's just not many more options for Usyk at that point. He's beat the biggest names. He's beat the best guys. He's beat pretty much everyone there is to beat of the last era. So it seems like when he clears out the division, he wants to go for Alex Pereira, just a fun money fight, which you can't knock him for, but it would not even be slightly competitive. Sure, Alex Pereira has one of the most lethal left hooks of all time in combat sports. He's put out big, scary men with that left hook just in one punch, but when you look at it in kickboxing and all the sports he's taken up, MMA, he sets this shot up with the leg kicks. Obviously, the kicking game, he has some of the greatest kicks in MMA as well. It's not just the left hook, but he's a very well-rounded overall striker, and that just will not translate well to boxing. We've seen him in boxing exchanges with Israel Adesanya, a middleweight in the UFC. Obviously a very, very decorated and talented kickboxer in his own right, and UFC former champion, but that's not boxing. And Alex Pereira got put out cold to the hands of Israel Adesanya, just up against the fence, throwing a couple big right hands over the top, a left hook behind it, another right hand, and Alex Pereira went out cold. And granted, he was cutting a lot of weight to make middleweight at 185 pounds in the UFC, but it will not matter. Oleksandr Usyk will either just run rings around him or probably hurt him really, really bad, especially deeper this fight goes on. Alex Pereira has never been used to just strictly boxing for a 36-minute fight, 12-rounder, if that is what this would be. It's just not even comparable. If this was MMA, obviously Pereira would smoke Usyk, but considering this would be in boxing, Usyk would smoke Alex. Not even a competition.
Yeah, we've just seen how these type of fights go too often at a time, and I feel like a lot of people at this point kind of understand that if the boxer comes over to MMA, then the MMA guy is going to win, and if the MMA guy comes over to boxing, the boxer's gonna win, and that's just typically how that matchup goes, which makes sense. They have mastery over their own sport. But of course, the appeal is just the pure spectacle of it. Two huge stars currently in the world in their respective sports, dominating figures, coming in, drawing a big crowd, big attention, big media, and big hype. So that's just the main appeal of it. Otherwise, like we've been saying, there's really no chance for Alex Pereira to win this fight at all. And Usyk coming up to the end of his career, trying to just get this as a one last big money fight. But yeah, mainly like we're saying, there's just no way that such a decorated boxer who has beat all the most dangerous threats, all the legends that have come in the generation that he's in both cruiserweight and heavyweight, would lose to, you know, an MMA champion, regardless of how good his striking is in MMA. It just wouldn't happen. But there's definitely a whole different aspect to this fight even happening. Of course, both fighters are on board for this, but there's a much deeper thing here in which we're missing out, is whether or not the UFC and Dana White would actually allow this fight to go down. And this has been a big issue in so many of the times fighters trying to make crossover events happen from the UFC. But the issue is they're contracted to stay in the UFC, and they're only permitted to fight elsewhere if Dana White and the UFC allow them to. And Dana White is not a fan of these crossover events, and he doesn't want these fights to happen, and I'm sure he just sees no point in letting one of his biggest superstars go over to a whole different sport just to get smoked and then come back and have a diminished value potentially, and waste years off his career potentially like Conor McGregor did. So that's definitely a whole different aspect here.
Yeah, besides it just being a money fight, there's nothing really here to gain for Alex Pereira, because you're not going to put up a fight against Usyk. You're going to get dismantled probably. He has had one boxing match, but the only way this fight really does happen, in my opinion, is if maybe Turkey Al-Sheikh and Saudi Arabia want one last big fight for Usyk and they want to put on a mega fight. They are also working with the UFC and maybe potentially working on a boxing banner under TKO, so maybe that could possibly be a way that this fight happens, but who knows? Probably pretty unlikely, because the risk for Alex Pereira is just not worth it, especially right now where he is in his career. He still has a lot left to do in MMA, and he is getting older. So is Usyk, both around the same age, like 37, so both guys still have a little bit more to do, especially Alex, because Usyk's kind of done it all already.
Yeah, and for Pereira in general, it just doesn't fully make sense for him other than money-wise, and there's just so much for him still to do in the UFC, especially this massive Ankalaev fight, which is a very dangerous fight for him. But if he's able to win this fight, he's going to take the world by storm and is going to be seen as one of the greatest fighters of all time. And the biggest reference for a situation like this is Francis Ngannou, who got out of his UFC contract, was on top of the world, current UFC heavyweight champion, got out of that, was no longer heavyweight champion, moved to boxing, got big success against Tyson Fury, dropping him in that fight. Looked like he could be a bit of a name in there, did make a lot of money, and then went up against Anthony Joshua and just got absolutely flatlined completely. And it's very possible Alex could even get done similarly. But let us know down below if you would want to see an Alex Pereira versus Oleksandr Usyk boxing fight. And if you enjoyed the video, be sure to leave a like, subscribe, and click the video on the screen for more Punch Talk.